Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today I have this 2006 Toyota Sienna right here, and I'm going to be doing a timing belt and a water pump, really the whole timing belt kit. And if you've been following me for a while, you may recognize this van because it's the same blue van that I did knock sensors on and I made a video a few months back. So this van right here, it's got right at 207,000 miles on it. It's already had the timing belt replaced once at around 90,000 miles, not by me. But that was over 10 years ago, so it's definitely due for another one. So I'm hoping that of all the timing belt videos out there on this engine, I'm hoping I can make this one the most comprehensive. That way you guys won't have to watch any other video but this one, and you'll be able to do it yourself, or at least know what's involved step by step. And of course the engine here in this 2006 Sienna is the 3.3 liter V6 engine. And right there is the timing belt sticker from the first time it was replaced, and I believe it was done at the dealer originally. Now, if you've stumbled across this video, perhaps you have another model. Maybe you have a Camry or a Highlander or a Solara or a Lexus RX330, RX300. There's actually several models that contain either this engine or the 3.0 liter, which is very similar and almost the exact same process. So you'll be able to use this video as a guide to do any of those models. So now let me briefly go over the parts I'm going to be using to do this job. So I'm using this Aisin timing belt kit. There's the part number right there. Now Aisin is the original equipment for Toyota, so that's what I would recommend using on this vehicle. Now if you open the box, these are the components that you'll find, and I've taken them all out for you so you can see. If you buy this kit, it comes with the tensioner, comes with the idler pulley, comes with the tensioner pulley, comes with a water pump and the water pump gasket. It comes with the timing belt sticker, so you can put the miles that you replaced it at. And of course the timing belt itself right there, made in Japan. Now a couple other things I would recommend for this job are the two belts, the power steering belt and the alternator belt. So I've got two new belts here, that way I can replace those as well while I'm doing this job. Also included in the kit are some instructions that you can read through. It'll give you some tips and tricks, and these right here are all the models that this part number of kit will fit. As you can see, this kit can be used on both the 1MZ FE and the 3MZ FE engines in various applications. There are even some torque specs listed on this paper. Now actually the first thing that I want to do is drain the cooling system. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to remove this radiator cap. Set this guy to the side for now, and we're going to go up in the air and look underneath. Okay, now we're here on the passenger side front and the car's up in the air, so let's come on the bottom. And what I actually want to do is I want to capture as much of this coolant as I possibly can, because I recently replaced it and I don't want any of it to go to waste. And Toyota engineers have so kindly placed these drain cocks. As you can see, there's one right here, and then there's another drain cock if we come over to the front of the engine. And the second drain cock is right here to the right of the oil filter, right behind the catalytic converter and the exhaust. It's kind of hard to see from the bottom. It's actually easier to see it from the top. But anyway, I'm back to the drain cock that's on the rear of the engine, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of vacuum tubing that is 5/16 diameter, and I'm going to fit it right over the end here. And then I'm going to take a 10mm and I'm going to crack that nut loose. So let me break this nut loose here. Now at this point, as you can see, I will be able to drain all of my coolant into a container, and I'll be able to reuse it. That way I don't waste it all when I remove the water pump and it all spills everywhere. Now I've taken another 5/16 piece of vacuum hose and I've put it right there on the other drain cock that's behind the catalytic converter, and this one's actually a lot easier to get to from the top as opposed to the bottom. But at this point I have both of these draining into a pan under the vehicle, so I'm going to wait till that's done and then we will proceed. Okay, now I've removed both tubes, closed both drain cocks, very important, don't forget to close them. And now I've successfully captured my coolant here that I will put into these two containers for future use. Okay, next I'm going to reinstall the radiator cap temporarily until this job is done. Now on this model I need to remove the cowling and the wiper arms. Depending on your model, you may or may not need to do this. But I believe on the Sienna, and I think on most of the Lexus RX models, and I think maybe on the Highlander too, this may be required. 14mm. Now with the hood closed, lift up on the wiper arms, kind of rotate them back and forth, pop them off. Now with the hood back open, we need to remove this plastic piece, and depending on how many times this has been on or off will determine how difficult it is to remove. But it's got these little tabs that you're supposed to depress and then push up, but I mean, I think this thing's pretty much done for, so I'm just gonna come over here to the corners, kind of undo this corner, gonna undo this corner over here, and then I should be able to just pull this straight up and out like so. Next, this whole wiring harness has to be removed here. Just stick a screwdriver here to release that, pop it up. Now for here, normally I would say pinch on this side to pull it out, but it's already kind of messed up anyway, so I'm just gonna kind of rip it out here and here. Gonna unplug this one for the wipers. Then right here, this grommet, you just push it through, push the grommet out, and then fish all the wires through. Remove these 4 10mm bolts for the wiper arm assembly. Or really the wiper transmission would be the proper term. Now there's 8 more 10mm bolts to be removed here. Now this should lift out at this point. Okay, after removing the cowling, I'm gonna go ahead and start removing the torque mount and all the motor mount brackets and some of these little wires and things here, so let's get into it. So let's set this ground wire aside. Sometimes it can be a good idea to thread these bolts back in where they go so they don't get lost or misplaced. But now I'm going to move this wire to the side, remove this 14mm for the torque mount, pop this little tube off, remove that 12 that's right down there, remove this other 12, take this bracket out of the way, remove the rest of these 14s. Pull this bracket out of the way.
A few moments later.
Okay, funny story. So I got this bolt out. Now this bolt and the one behind it were completely seized in the bracket. I tried heating them up with a torch for a while, spraying some lubricant, some back and forth, some this and that. Well, anyway, these bolts were not going to come out. So I broke them with a very big breaker bar. So the tips of these bolts are snapped off inside the bracket way down there. Same with this one too. Man, yeah, look how nasty that thing was. So anyway, I had to break the bolts. The tips are still stuck down in there, but I had to do what I had to do to get this thing off. But it's no problem, I'll be able to overcome that. So let's get this bracket off really quick. Okay, so for now, let me get this 10 off right here. I'll just set this out of the way for now. All right, let's see if we can get this bracket off here. Oh, how things have developed. This is a fun one. Well, it's finally out. But if you're doing this at home and this happens to you, I really pity you. I don't know what to tell you to do. I really don't. So with some upward pressure from the engine hoist combined with whacking that bracket right there a whole bunch of times with a hammer and then eventually with an air hammer, eventually the thing came off. So those 2 bolts right there that are broken off, I don't even want to attempt to try to remove them from that bracket. I'm sure there's some more experienced rust belt mechanics watching this that could get these bolts out no problem. But here in South Texas, we're scared of even so much of a speck of rust. So I called my friend at the Toyota dealer and he's ordered me that bracket and those 2 bolts. It's about $80 my cost. And to be honest, that $80 is worth my time of trying to get those bolts out. Plus I beat up that bracket pretty bad anyway with the hammer. Okay, at this point I'm gonna go around, and the wiring harness here, there are several spots like right here where it is attached, and this little blue tab's kind of broken already, but you're gonna want to lift that wiring harness up. So here's another spot right here, kind of pull the tab back and then lift up on the harness. And there's one way back here in the back too, so there's 3 in total. Once your harness is up like that, you'll be able to see more of the bolts from the timing cover and be able to get those off. These are all 10mm, by the way. Before I take out any more bolts, let me get this alternator bracket removed. There's a 12mm nut here. Then there's a 14mm bolt right here. So here's the bracket, and I guess I'll just leave that bolt sticking out a little bit, no problem. Okay, now I can get to the other 10 that's right there below, or that was behind that bracket rather. Here we go. Get out a few more here. Okay, way back here in the back by the firewall, there's another bolt here. And the last bolt is right here, right there. So let me get that one out. Okay, so all 6 bolts have been removed from the upper cover. Now, technically, you're supposed to pull off the lower cover first, because that last little bolt that we took off down there, it actually goes through both upper and lower covers at the same time. And that part of the upper cover actually sits behind the lower cover. So technically you're supposed to pull off the lower cover first. Plus right now if I try to pull the upper cover off, it hits on that broken bolt right there. So I'm trying to do everything that I can on the top before we move to the bottom. So the only other things left, let me go ahead and take off the alternator belt. This bolt right here in front of the alternator needs to be loosened, and it is 12mm. Now with that bolt loosened, we can loosen the other one, and the tension on the alternator belt will be released. Go ahead and pop this off. And as you can see from this little thread sticking out, this belt was definitely in need of replacement anyway. Okay, before we go any further with this thing, let's go ahead and disconnect the battery. And the reason why is because while you have the timing belt removed from the vehicle, you don't want anybody unknowingly getting in the car and trying to start it. That would be very bad. So let's go ahead and just disconnect the battery to prevent that risk. All right, now using a 21mm socket, let's go ahead and remove the wheel and tire. All right, let's remove this plastic cover here. Supposed to be a push pin here, but it's missing. Okay, next we have to get the power steering pump belt removed. Now from the backside, let me try to explain what I'm talking about here. So you see that there's a bolt that's on the bottom right here with a nut on the front. And then right above that, there's a bolt that goes from the front side straight through the back, and it threads into that nut that's welded on the back of the bracket. So it's that upper bolt that you want to loosen, not the lower one. So in other words, from the front, you want to loosen the top bolt right there, not the bottom one. Okay, so that bolt can be kind of a pain to get to. I use a flex head ratcheting wrench like this. It's a 12mm, and then I go all the way from the back side and I squeeze it in there like this. And once I'm on the bolt, I can break it loose. Now this bolt does not have to be removed, it just needs to be loosened a little bit. Okay, let's go ahead and loosen these other 12s here. I'm actually just gonna take them out completely, because I'm gonna need this bracket to be removed anyway. Now the pump should move now. Now we can get that off. Now the crank pulley here, in order to get this off, this is a 22mm bolt. And normally what I do on these is I take a 22mm weighted socket with an impact driver, and I'm able to take it right off. If you don't have any air tools, what you're gonna have to do is these two holes in the crank pulley, they are threaded. So they're threaded in order to attach a spanner wrench of some kind in order to hold the crank pulley while you loosen the bolt. Otherwise, if you just take a breaker bar and try to loosen this bolt, it's gonna spin the whole crank and you won't be able to get it off. Let's just see if the weighted socket will do the trick here. Looks like it. If you have air tools, having a set of weighted sockets like this is essential for getting crank pulley bolts off. The extra weight of the socket delivers a lot more torque to the bolt, and you'll be able to break them loose. So I'm actually just going to use this basic puller from Harbor Freight in order to get off the crank pulley. So pretty basic, just a couple bolts, this piece, we'll be able to get it off. This is how I'm going to set up the puller here. So I'm going to thread those two bolts into the threaded holes on the crank pulley. Then I'll be able to tighten this screw here, and we'll be able to pop that crank pulley out no problem. So here's kind of the setup. So just tighten this down until it presses up against the crankshaft. Make sure it's not pressing on the pulley, otherwise that's pretty counterproductive. Just press on the crank only. Let her rip. Oops. Well, you see it started coming off, but now I'm hitting on the fender liner. So, okay, let me remove this deal now. I'll just have to swap out these two bolts with some shorter bolts. Try it again. All right, there we go. So you can see what I was talking about earlier, that this top bolt right here in the cover, it goes through both covers, and the lower cover sits kind of on top of the upper cover. So let's get the lower cover off here. We've only got, I believe, 3 more bolts to go anyway. We can pop this guy off here. Okay, at this point, back up top, let me see if I can get this upper cover off. There. Had to fight it a little more than normal because of these 2 broken bolts. Okay, now this bracket here needs to come off, so there's a 12mm bolt right here on top. Let's remove this last 12 right here. All right, let's go back up top and see if we can get this bracket off. So that bottom bolt that won't come out, you'll just have to kind of leave that one in there. That way, because it hits on the frame. Hopefully I have enough room to sneak it out. And it looks like I do. So this one right here, you'll have to leave in there, but you'll still be able to get it out. Alrighty, it's almost time to remove the timing belt. And the next thing to do is to set cylinder 1 at top dead center on the compression stroke, which will put us in exactly the right position to remove and install the timing belt. Now, it's very simple to do this. All we gotta do is come and check our marks. So as you can see right there on the cam pulley, there is a small mark, which needs to be lined up with that notch back there on the backing plate. So as you can see, we're a little bit too far advanced, so I'll have to rotate the engine clockwise until the marks line up. It's a similar situation back here where that mark on the cam pulley needs to line up with that notch right back there on the backing plate. Now here under the car on the crank pulley, What we need to be concerned with is that dot back there on the crankshaft sprocket needs to line up with that small notch right there on the oil pump behind it. So let me first remove this piece here, and we're going to temporarily reinstall the crank bolt. That way we can actually spin the engine clockwise and get our marks to all line up. Now, using a 22mm socket and a long ratchet or breaker bar, we're gonna rotate the engine by hand clockwise until those two marks are lined up and our cam pulleys are lined up as well. Now notice that after doing that, the marks on our cam pulleys, they're not in the right position. They're actually 180 degrees opposite of where they need to be. Now the reason for this is because the crankshaft spins twice as fast as the cams. So what you'll have to do is rotate the crankshaft another full revolution, and then that will in turn rotate the cam pulleys another half a turn, and then your marks will line up. So always remember that the crankshaft turns twice as fast as the cams, and the cams turn half as fast as the crank would be another way to think of it. Okay, so let's bring that mark on the crank sprocket another full revolution. Okay, now you don't want to spin the engine counterclockwise, so we're going to try not to go past the mark. And right there, that right there is about where we want to be, so let's go check our cams. And now, as you can see, our cams are in the right place and the marks are lined up properly. That rear cam is a little bit difficult to see, but you should be able to see it well enough to see that the marks are lined up back here as well. So let me get this crank bolt off once again. All right, let's pop off this little 10 over here. You won't be able to get the belt off if you leave that little bracket on. Now let's get the tensioner off by removing those two 12mm bolts. The power steering pump is going to have to be pressed all the way down in order to get access to that top bolt. I'm using a 12mm on a swivel, and there's just enough room to get it in there. Now we got to push the power steering pump up a little to get access to the bottom bolt. And as soon as we break this one loose, the timing belt should be loose and we'll be able to get it off. You can see this bottom bolt is much longer. Get this little guy out of the way here. All right, let's see if we can get this belt off now. Now to remove that tensioner pulley, you'll need a 10mm hex socket. Now, before we loosen this, be careful because there is a washer that sits behind. Move my light. Okay, there, I moved the light a little bit. Hopefully you can see that a little better. But anyway, behind where that tensioner pulley mounts to the engine, there is a washer that when you remove this, the washer is probably going to fall out. Make sure that you recover that so that you can reuse it. Let me break it loose by hand first. Oops, accidentally just whacked my phone. But anyway, I broke it free. I'll finish taking it out with the drill here. Now where is that little washer that always likes to fall out? Here it is. See that right back there, guys? Make sure that that does not fall out and get lost. Okay, we're almost ready to get the water pump off, but not quite, because if you notice here, that black metal backing plate actually sits over the water pump, which means that in order to remove the water pump, you have to remove that black backing plate. But in order to remove that backing plate, you have to remove the camshaft pulleys. First of all, let's take a 14 and remove this idler pulley. Okay, next, to remove the camshaft pulleys, you will need a tool like this to hold the pulley in place while you remove the bolt. Caution, children. The ice cream truck just showed up at our shop. So this is much needed on a June summer in Texas. Anyway, ice cream break is over, so these bolts here are 17 millimeter. So take a 17 millimeter wrench, preferably a long one, because these bolts can be on there pretty tight. We'll see how tight these ones are. Actually, let me get this tool on here first. Hold the pulley in place. There, I'm gonna set it up like this.
A few moments later.
Yeah, these pulleys are on there pretty tight. Let me see if I can just take it off with an impact. Yeah, the impact makes it a lot easier. I just don't know how I'm gonna do that on the rear cam. Guess I'm just gonna have to fight it out by hand. Let me pop this little guy off. All right, let's see how much of a pain this is gonna be here.
Okay, hold it. Buddy, I don't have a good back. You're gonna have to push it. I think, Jack, you're gonna have to really hold it.
Okay, yeah, it's loose. Thank you. All right, well, after all that, it's loose now. The rear cam pulley, it's got the lip in the front, and the front cam pulley has the lip in the back, so they're opposites. Now there's 6 10 millimeter bolts that hold the backing plate in place. All right, now this guy should come out at this point. Okay, now at this point we can inspect our cam seals for any signs of leakage. As you can see, these ones are pretty dry. Same with the one back there. Cam seal back there looks pretty dry. Now you guys may be wondering, because I know you've seen that there is some oily mess here, some engine oil that's been spilled over time. And I will say a little history. The valve cover gaskets were replaced recently by me because they were leaking pretty bad. So some of this oil residue could just be left over from the valve cover gaskets. But either way, the cam seals are not leaking, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to go ahead while I'm here and I'm going to pull off the crank sprocket so I can inspect the crank seal. There are a couple of keyways in the crank here, so just make sure that those don't fall out. But check out this crank seal. This thing is dry, guys. No need to replace it. With everything out of the way now, before I pull the water pump off, now is a good time to clean. So all this leaves and dirt and grass and oil and grease and all this stuff, I'm going to get it cleaned off really well, and then we will proceed. Funny little side note here, I actually made a video doing knock sensors on this van, and while I was removing the lower intake manifold, it looked like it had already been removed previously by somebody else. And the bolts that hold the lower intake in place, they have washers on them. Now one of the bolts actually was missing a washer, and it looked like somebody had put another washer on it. I could tell because the washer didn't look the same as the other ones. But now that I've taken this backing plate off, I think I just found the washer. When I was taking the backing plate off, I heard something fall down, and it looks like that's it. Who knows how long that washer's been back there for. but I found it now. Okay, so I've pretty much gotten this thing cleaned where I want it. So let's go ahead and get the water pump off. So let's start with these two 10mm bolts that are on top, and then we'll go to the bottom. Okay, we're dripping a little bit, so I don't know how much coolant's gonna come out when I remove this water pump. Hopefully not too much. Just gonna let it drain a little bit. Alright, that's about it. So a little coolant still came out, but not as much as there would have been if I wouldn't have drained the coolant beforehand from the drain cocks. Alright. Man, so there is not much space at all because this thing hits the frame when you try to pull it out. But watch this. I'm gonna try to at least get that right side stud to be loose over here. Let me see. There we go. Okay. It takes a little persuasion, but it will come out without having to jack up the motor or anything like that, or having to remove those two studs. Now let's get this little gasket off. Now the good thing about this gasket is, so on the ice and timing belt kits, this gasket is metal with rubber, as you can see. There are certain aftermarket timing belt kits, like I know Continental is one of them, that it comes with a paper gasket, and I hate those paper gaskets because if somebody has already done a timing belt with using a paper gasket for the water pump, then you're coming in behind them 100,000 miles later and trying to redo it. That paper gasket gets all stuck here, and then you got to spend a bunch of time scraping it off. But with the metal gasket, there's not a whole lot of cleanup involved. So with the old gasket removed, I would spend the time while you're here and get that gasket surface on the engine as clean as you possibly can. I like to use a Scotch-Brite scuffing pad and just go around it and knock off as much of the rust as you possibly can. And if whoever did the previous timing belt on this used a paper gasket, then I pity you, because it's probably going to take you 3 or 4 times as long to get all that old paper gasket scraped off. I just have to say, guys, if your timing belt kit contains a water pump with a paper gasket, I would get a different kit, because paper gaskets are much more likely to leak anyway. You see how I've cleaned this here? If I use the metal gasket, the ice and water pump, guys, this thing is not going to leak, especially with the bolts being torqued down right and everything. But I've seen even on this specific engine, paper gaskets leak. So I would not do that, because this is not a job you want to have to go back in and warranty. Or just for your average DIYer, it's not a job that you want to have to do a second time. This would not be fun to do twice. So anyway, this is what I use, just a little piece of Scotch-Brite pad. I go around and I just kind of scuff all the rust and stuff off until it gets super clean. Then I'll take some brake clean on a clean rag, wipe it down, get it nice and clean, free of any oil or debris. Okay, now I can go ahead and install the new gasket. Place it properly over the 2 studs. Just slide it on. There's another little dowel right there that it fits on, and one up there too. Okay, now here comes the water pump. I'm just going to come from the top this time instead of from the bottom. You could do it from the bottom. But anyway, as I get this on, I feel like I need to say one more time, please make sure when you get to this point in the job that you clean your mating surface where I put the gasket on the engine, as I mentioned before. Clean that, and don't be lazy with that, because I know by this point in the job you're probably tired. You just want to be done with it, and I totally understand that. I've been there, but if you skimp out on that, it could cost you later. So please take the time. I'm telling you, I've seen things go wrong here with people that get in a hurry and don't clean their gasket surface well. I've even made the same mistake, so I just don't want you guys to make the same mistake. Okay, there we go. Now let's get our bolts in. Okay, I've got the 3 water pump bolts and 3 water pump nuts installed, so now I'm gonna torque them all down to 71 inch-pounds. Okay, once you've torqued all the water pump bolts, now we gotta get the backing plate back on. And by the way, now would be a good time while you have everything disassembled to go ahead and get everything cleaned off. If there's any oily residue on the backing plate, on the upper or lower covers, go ahead and get those cleaned off. Now let's get our 6 10mm bolts reinstalled on this backing plate here. Now these bolts here, just snug them down, don't over tighten them. Probably do about what you did on the water pump. Okay, at this point, let's get our cam gears reinstalled. Now when you install these cam pulleys, the pulleys are the same. It's just that this one in the front here, you want the flange, or they call it the belt guide. You want it back by the backing plate. And the cam pulley that's in the back, you want that belt guide to be in the front. Now these bolts for the cam pulleys, you don't need to put any Loctite on them or anything like that, but they do have a torque spec of 92 foot-pounds, which is quite a bit. So we're going to hold the pulley with the pulley holder and with the torque wrench. We're gonna see if we can hit 92 foot-pounds on both of these cam gears. Okay, the first one back here was pretty easy to hit. Now let's try to hit 92 foot-pounds on the rear cam gear. All right, let me get set up back here.
134.
Okay, I may need a shorter socket here. All right, let's try with the shorter socket, 17mm. Okay. I'm in position here. Let me slide a cheater pipe over the cam pulley holder. Try to give me a little bit more leverage to work with here. Now let's hit 92. All right, that wasn't too bad. And of course, keep in mind here that all this moving around of the cam pulleys and stuff is going to throw off your marks a little bit. So as you can see here, we actually need to go back counterclockwise just a hair for our timing marks to line up here. So that's no problem. Just rotate the gears forward or back, however they need to go, so that they line up, and do that before you try to get the belt on. Now let's go ahead and grab our brand new idler pulley. Take the bolt from the old idler pulley. We're gonna go ahead and get this installed. Now make sure here that when you install this pulley, make sure that the bolt is kind of centered in the pulley. Cause see, like right here, it looks like it's in place, but it's actually not. Watch if I move it a little bit. There, now we're in place. So just make sure the bolt is centered in the hole. And when you tighten it, I mean, it should center up, but what I always do is I always hold it, you know, once I thread the bolt in a couple threads, I pull the pulley out like this, and I just kind of hold it there. And then I run the bolt down. And then from there, go ahead and tighten it up to 32 foot-pounds. That's it. Okay, so this is our old tensioner pulley. And so what you want to do is make sure that you save the washer that's on the back side of this to reuse it. And then the bolt as well is going to be transferred to the new idler pulley. So then of course, here's the new pulley. Bolt in. And then make sure that the washer stays in place and does not get lost the whole time you're installing it, because if this washer gets lost or you don't put it back on, then you're going to have a lot of trouble because the tensioner will not be able to tension. All right, so now we're going to get the tensioner pulley reinstalled. Hold the washer on the back side so it doesn't fall off here. Snug this bolt down. Okay, now with the torque wrench, we're gonna go 25 foot-pounds on this bolt. Now, if I were you, I would pay attention to this because I actually saw one time on this particular engine where this bolt was over-tightened previously and the threads in the engine were stripped, so please don't over-tighten. That's it right there. When you're done torquing this bolt, the tensioner pulley should move freely like this. If it does not, then you did something wrong. You're gonna wanna fix that before you proceed any further. Okay, let's go ahead and get our crank sprocket installed. Of course, make sure that your keyways are in place on the crank. I think that goes without saying. Also make sure that the teeth on the pulley, both on this crank pulley, or on this crank sprocket rather, and on the cam pulleys, make sure that they're all free of dirt and debris. And I can see that my marks up here are still lined up. I didn't move the crank at all, so we're still good here. All right, now the moment that you've all been waiting for is the installation of the timing belt. And I love these Toyota timing belts because they make it so easy. So on all the Toyota timing belts, there are marks on the belt. So FR stands for front. So you want the arrow facing toward the front, which would be away from the engine. So the arrow faces away from the engine. So the belt kind of goes on there like this. This dotted mark lines up with the dot on the crank pulley. And then if you continue on here, this white line here and the other one a little bit further down here, see if you can see those both at the same time. Those two white marks go onto the marks on the cam pulleys. So basically the belt goes on this way. This one would go on the rear cam pulley, this one on the front cam pulley. And then, and as I mentioned, just remember to have the arrows facing away from the engine, because if you have the belt the other way and the arrows are facing toward the engine, then the marks will not line up right. All right, so you see our little dot right there on the crank gear. So that's where we want our little dotted line on the timing belt to line up with. So let me kind of fish the belt up through the top here, or through the bottom to the top. All right, so you see our dotted line here. We're gonna line that up. So our dotted line is now perfectly in line with the dot on the crank sprocket, so that's how we're gonna leave it. Now while you're holding the belt in place, go ahead and get your little retainer guide, this little deal put back on. And you see this little piece, it just kind of keeps the belt in place while you're installing the timing belt. Tighten this bolt a little bit. All right, let's move on. At this point, we're gonna come to the top, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure that the belt doesn't move off of the position that we're in on the crank pulley. Then I'm gonna run it over the water pump, and gonna pull as much of the slack out of the belt on the bottom as possible. Okay, I've double checked one more time on the bottom. My marks on the crank sprocket are still good. So now I'm gonna run the belt over, and the teeth should pretty much, when you pull all the slack out of the belt by hand, the teeth should pretty much line up. So when you run the belt, so like look right here where my left thumb is, so I'm one tooth off here. So what I'm gonna do is try to get it on here. We just take a 17. Let me rotate the cam pulley just a little bit this way, see, like that. Because all that matters here is that the paint marks on the belt line up with the marks on the cam gears. As long as that happens, then you're gonna be in time. Go a little bit more here. All right, so my mark here is good. So I'm just gonna temporarily use one of these little plastic clamps. And I'm just gonna use it temporarily just to hold the belt in place. All right, so you can see on the bottom here that we're still lined up on the crank sprocket. And if we come here on our front cam sprocket, we're also lined up. The paint mark on the belt is lined up with the notch on the sprocket, so we're good here. As I mentioned just a minute ago, don't be afraid to grab these cam bolts with the wrench and kind of manipulate them a little bit to get the belt to line up. That's not a problem at all. As long as your paint marks are lined up with the marks on the pulleys, then you're going to end up being in time in the end. So now we're going to run this thing underneath the idler pulley here. Still want to kind of make sure that you don't come off of the crank sprocket down there. Make sure your belt goes underneath the stud coming out of that water pump area. Otherwise, if your belt is above that stud, it's going to get caught up. So this back one's kind of hard to see, but I'll do my best here to show you. Just kind of put the belt over that over the belt guide on the pulley. Take it off of the tensioner pulley down on the bottom. Here, let me show you. All right, let me try this angle here. Okay, this is the stud I'm referring to. So make sure that the belt is not, that the lower part of the belt is not above this stud. And then when you go over that rear pulley back there, you're gonna wanna take it off of this tensioner pulley right here, kind of lay it off to the side like that. That way you can get some more slack in the belt. And you'll be able to slide it over the belt guide that's on this cam pulley, or the lip of the pulley. And so that's kind of about what you want to do right there. And check my marks. Okay, I'm sorry this is so hard to see, but see my marks are way off. So let me correct that real quick. See, I'm just kind of rotating the cam pulley and then slowly working the belt over to where it'll be in the right position. Like that. Now I'm going to rotate it back. Okay. See, now we're in place. It's really not that hard. You just have to manipulate the pulleys a little bit. Don't be scared. You're not going to hurt anything doing that. Okay, so I've double checked. All my marks are still on. So now I'm going to see if I can do this from the top. I'm going to reach down here and kind of hold the belt on the crank sprocket so it doesn't come off. And now I'm going to try to lift it up over the tensioner pulley here. See if I can do all that without my marks shifting or without the belt jumping off. Oops. I think it just jumped back here. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, my rear, it just jumped a tooth on the rear cam, but I just fixed it, so just pay attention to all that. Get everything. Should slide over. And see all the slack I have over here, so it wasn't hard at all to slide it over. Now I will point out something, because I've run into this before doing these timing belts. If you guys have trouble getting this belt right here to slide over the tensioner pulley, like let's say for example, let's say you're down here and you're pulling and pulling and you just can't get enough slack on the belt to slide it over this pulley, probably the reason why is because there's too much slack up here in between the two cams by this idler pulley up here. And so what you want to do is take out some of the slack, kind of tighten up this part of the belt. That way you'll get more slack down here and you'll be able to slide it over the pulley. And the way that you do that is kind of like how I did before. Just grab the bolt on the cam sprocket with the wrench, kind of turn it counterclockwise to get most of the slack on the belt over here. Tighten this part of it up, and then you'll actually be able to manipulate the belt down here and slide it over this tensioner pulley much easier. So there's a tip for you guys if you run into that. Just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, now let me address one other thing here. So all my marks are on, okay, as far as the belt to the pulleys. But if you notice that the backing plate behind there, the little notch on the backing plate, so both of my cam pulleys they're a little bit to the right of that, so they're not perfectly lined up. And however, my crank is exactly on the mark. It's just that the two cam pulleys are both shifted to the right a little bit. And the reason for that being that there's still too much slack in the belt here. So if both of the cam pulleys were actually to rotate counterclockwise, then it would pull a lot of the slack out of the belt, and then it would also bring my marks. It would bring the cam pulleys in line with the notch on the backing plate. Okay, so let's move both cam pulleys counterclockwise in order to try to correct that, just because if there's too much slack in this side of the belt, even though your marks are on, then when you go to install the tensioner, you're gonna have trouble because there's still not enough slack down there at the tensioner pulley for it to move enough to be able to put the tensioner on. All right, so I'm gonna take my 17mm wrench, put it on the bolt on this cam pulley to start, and I'm gonna hold the belt on the bottom on the crank sprocket because I don't want it to jump a tooth down at the bottom. But I'm just gonna rotate it a little bit and take out some more slack in the belt on this side. A little bit better there. Now, because of doing that, look, we've taken out a lot of slack here, but now we've gained some slack here. So now let me do the same to the pulley back there. We want as much of the slack on the tensioner side as we possibly can get without, of course, jumping a tooth. Okay, now we've taken out a lot of the slack here. We've gained some more slack down here. And now if you notice, compared to before, we're pretty much in line. The cam pulleys are pretty much in line with the notch on the backing plate. So we're in a lot better shape here. And same with the back cam. And then let's double check our mark on the bottom. And let's make sure we haven't jumped a tooth down here. And it looks like we haven't, so we're good. Okay, now here is our brand new tensioner. Now, of course, you've got a long bolt and a short bolt. The short bolt obviously goes through the shorter part. The long bolt goes through the longer part of the tensioner. And that's how you're gonna install it onto the car. Okay, so we've gotten as much slack over here on this side as we can, which is good because when we put the tensioner in, we're gonna need it. So let me kind of lift the power steering pump up as much as I can. Let me take these bolts out for now, and then we're going to go up around the back side of the power steering pump. Maybe I need the pulley, power steering pump to go down actually. And you just kind of have to manipulate this until you get it in place, see that? Once you do that, kind of push up on it so you can get one bolt started. Let me move the power steering pump again because it's kind of in my way. Here we go. And I'm just going to get this bolt started here. I'm not going to fully tighten it yet. Alright, so that's started. We'll push this pulley down. Let's try to get the other bolt started. And once again, if you don't have enough slack on this side of the belt, this is going to be very, very difficult to do. It's a little bit tricky to do as is. Now it's still so tight to get that top bolt hole to line up. So I'm going to put the bolt in like this. Now I'm going to take a small pry bar like this, and I'm going to go in between the tensioner and that motor mount bracket. And I'm going to kind of pry on it a little bit on that tensioner to get the bolt to line up. See, now it's lining up. And I'm not applying a whole lot of pressure with the pry bar, just a little bit, because it's hard to do it by hand. Let me see if I can get my 12mm 1/4 inch socket to fit through here. See if we can get this started. Anyway, I got it started, I believe. All right, let me try to get in here with a 1/4 inch ratchet and just verify, because I don't want to cross thread this. Yeah, it's not cross-threaded. This is good. So let me just run this down until it's tight. I guess I don't need this pry bar anymore. Now those two bolts, they get torqued to 20 foot-pounds. Now it's very difficult, almost impossible to get a torque wrench in here. So, I mean, it's 20 foot-pounds, but I usually just do it by hand. I get a ratchet in here and I just tighten them to my satisfaction. All right, that's good. All right, that's good right there. So let's double check our marks one last time and then pull the pin. So I'm gonna double check everything at this point. Our mark here on the crank sprocket is good. Our mark here on the front cam is on. I'll go ahead and take this off. Our rear cam is right on the money as well. All right, so after you verify your marks one more time, let's go ahead and pull the pin. And notice how much easier that was than the Honda Accord that I did in the other video, just saying. Okay, now before we just slap this thing back together, let's do one more check to make double sure that we're not gonna have any issues with our timing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna rotate the crankshaft 2 full revolutions, which will in turn rotate the cams 1 full revolution. And we wanna do that and make sure that after 1 full revolution, our crank marks are still aligned and our cam pulley marks are still aligned. Okay, so I've got my crank pulley bolt threaded back in. And so I'm gonna rotate the engine clockwise, the way that it would normally turn. Okay, so I got a little too excited and I went a little bit too far. So let me do 2 more full revolutions and then we'll check the marks. I'll try not to go past it this time. Okay, so I'm dead on the crank down here, so let's take a look. Okay, so you see how the dot on the crank sprocket is lined up with the little notch on the oil pump behind it. So the crank is dead on. Now keep in mind, the paint marks on the timing belt are no longer relevant. Those are only relevant when you're setting up the timing. But once you start rotating the engine, they are no longer relevant. So back up here at the top, my front cam sprocket is lined up with the notch behind it on the backing plate. So we're good here. All right, now let's see if we can get a good view of the rear cam sprocket. Okay, this is a horrible angle for filming and I apologize, but you can see that the rear cam marks are lined up with the backing plate. So we're good back here as well. All right, let me get my crank bolt back off again. Now the rest of this repair, I'm gonna go through it pretty quickly because there's really only a few pieces to put back on the engine. It's not too bad. Oh, well, not this one, of course. But all the rest of it is going back. All right, so while we're here, we might as well get this piece back on. Do not forget to put this back on. If you forget to put this piece on, I will take this piece, come through the screen, and smack you upside the head with it. There. All right, now remember my bracket from the beginning with the broken bolts and all that. So this is getting discarded, except for this bolt that I'm gonna keep. And it's getting replaced with this brand new one that I've ordered from Toyota that they had in stock, as well as the 2 bolts that go to it. Now this is what I love about Toyota. A lot of these little parts for their old vehicles, even though this thing's almost 20 years old, they're still readily available. Most American made vehicles like Fords, Dodge, Chevys, by the time those things get to 5 or 10 years old, a lot of these parts, they start discontinuing them, but not on Toyota. So remember, stick your bottom bolt in first or you won't be able to get it in after the fact. And let's slide this bracket on. Get my bolts in. Get the one nut on the bottom over here, way down on the bottom side. Now remember, those 3 bolts, they go through the water pump as well, so the torque spec on them is 21 foot-pounds. There should be plenty of room to get a torque wrench in there, as you can see here. Next, you can go ahead and get this bracket back on for the alternator. Okay, once you get that alternator bracket reinstalled, let's work on getting the timing covers in place. Now remember, on your timing covers, that the upper cover was designed to sit behind the lower cover, as you see here. So that being said, let's get the upper cover on first. And of course, on the back side of the cover, there's a rubber gasket. So make sure that's in place all the way around. This gasket does not need to be replaced. It's just a little seal to keep dust out. Just make sure it's there when you put the cover back. Okay, I've gotten all the timing cover bolts reinstalled for the upper cover. The official torque spec is 75 inch-pounds, but you really don't need to torque the timing cover bolts, just snug them down. Another thing too that I overlooked is it would actually be easier to install that little bracket on the alternator after installing the upper cover, just because it makes access to that timing cover bolt there a little bit more difficult, but you can still get to it with a 1/4 inch ratchet. So if you install the alternator bracket first like I did, it's not the end of the world. You can still get to the bolt. Okay, let's get the lower cover on now. Should fit right into place. Alright, after installing the 4 bolts to the lower cover, we're pretty much ready to get the crank pulley on. And just a quick tip on the crank pulley, you remember how difficult it was to remove? We had to use a puller to pull it off and all that. Well, if you want the crank pulley to slide on nice and smooth, do what I did. Take some sandpaper and go on the inside of the pulley where it's going to fit with the crankshaft, and just sandpaper the inside of the crank pulley. I use 500 grit. You don't want to use something so coarse. But you see how there's no rust inside the crank pulley? That's how you want it. And if you do that, watch how easy this is going to slide on. Boom, look at that. Beautiful. Now this crank bolt, it gets torqued to 162 foot-pounds. And I know some of you are going to freak out on me for doing this, but I usually just take my impact with the weighted socket and then give it a good hit. That's good right there. Okay, so I've installed my power steering belt. Now I just have to get the bracket on for the power steering pump so I can tighten the belt. Now you can take an object of your choosing, a punch like this or a screwdriver, put some downward pressure to tighten the belt, and then go ahead and tighten the bolt. So I've tightened both of these bolts, and this right here is about the amount of slack you want in the belt. So if it squeals, then I'll need to tighten it some more. And then don't forget to go back up and tighten the upper bolt on the power steering pump as well. Just a heads up on this one, the way that I took it off was using that flex head ratcheting wrench, but you can use a regular ratchet. If you have the right size socket and extension, you'll be able to fit it there, and you'll be able to loosen and tighten the bolt for the power steering pump. And while you're up under here, now would be a good time to get the belt on for the alternator. All right, next get this plastic cover with the 2 10mm bolts and the plastic push pin reinstalled. All right, next get the wheel and tire on. And most of these Toyotas have a wheel lug nut torque spec of anywhere from 76 to 84 foot-pounds. Okay, next up top, make sure your wiring harness is in place everywhere that it needs to go here. Next, we need to tighten up this alternator belt. All right, once you get the belt tightened, then get the 2 alternator bolts tight, and then you should be left with a belt tension of about that right there. All right, so this upper bracket, you notice that I knocked a lot of the rust off on the bottom and on the top. That way we have a nice flat surface, and this just sets right down there, like so. Let me pull this bolt out real quick. I had just put it there to save it. Now I gotta get the upper torque mount in place. It just fits as so, and I'll start getting the bolts started here. I'm not going to tighten them yet until I get them all in place. All right, we've got all these bolts started. Now let's get this bracket on. All right, now let's get this other upper bracket reinstalled here. All right, now let's get them all tightened up here. All right, next, don't forget your ground wires, and don't forget that little guy back there too. All right, next let's get our wiper cowling reinstalled. You reattach the metal cowling Come over here to the driver's side and just pay attention to the fact that right there's going to be no bolt installed. So don't freak out thinking that you're missing a bolt, because that bolt gets installed when you reinstall the wiper transmission. All right, once you install the 4 bolts for the wiper transmission, then you're going to get your wiring harness fished back through. Okay, the wiring harness is now in place. Now install the plastic cowling. All right, next come the wipers. Reconnect the battery, of course. Okay, now the timing belt sticker that's included with the kit. There's no hard and fast rule on this, but I like to put them right here under the hood. So I just take a rag with some brake clean and wipe off the hood real well, and then put the sticker right there. It's really up to you though. You can put them anywhere. I just like to put them here under the hood because it's out of the direct heat of the engine bay, and the sticker tends to last and not get all faded and messed up. And of course, the last thing to do is get some coolant in this engine before we start it up. So the coolant's going in right now. And of course, I'm using the coolant that I saved left over, and then I'll probably need a little bit more. If you don't have a spill-free funnel like this, buy one online. They're about 30 bucks. It's definitely worth it. So for now, I just kind of have to hold this steady for a minute till it drains down. If you're wondering how much coolant to buy to do this job, I would say you need about 3 gallons in total. You may only use 2 to 2.5 gallons, but I would buy 3 just to be safe. If you're capturing your old coolant like how I did, I would still at least buy 1 gallon just so you have a little extra to put in if you're low. Well, let's crank up the car. The first start's always so fun. If your engine locks up, then you did something wrong. Don't go blaming me in the comments, guys. I showed you everything to do. Now let's hear what an engine sounds like when you do a timing belt the right way. And that's what she should sound like right there. Now just add a little more coolant as necessary while all the air bleeds out. Now if your model has some type of heater control valve, I would definitely put the heater on high and just put the fan speed on low or medium. That way the coolant can circulate through all the passages, including the heater core. That way if there's any air trapped inside the system, you get it bled out. Now I don't think that this van has a heater control valve, and many models probably don't, but I always put the heater on high just to be safe. It's just a habit I have on every vehicle. That way I can make sure there's no air trapped inside the cooling system. Now other than that, on this engine there's no bleeder valve or anything. The only thing I'd recommend doing to get the air out is to just leave a spill-free funnel on it like this. Let it get all the way fully to operating temperature. That way we can make sure the thermostat opens up. Then once the vehicle's fully warmed up, we're gonna shut it off, let it cool down, and then we'll take the funnel off, put the radiator cap on, and we're good to go. All right, if you guys have made it to this point and you're still watching, I just want to say thank you. You're awesome. If you guys are doing this yourself, if you follow every step that I've outlined, then you'll be able to also have a successful timing belt job. So thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'm pretty busy, so I'll try to answer them. Thank you guys once again, and I'll see you next time.